Hi again then guys, and welcome back to another look at the very recent history of the Gran Turismo franchise. Extremely recent, Gran Turismo 6. Because of course we are revisiting Spirit of Le Mans, in Gran Turismo 6 form in particular, to review some of the prototypes that we would commonly refer to as Le Mans cars in a general sense. The ones which have not been brought back yet. Sometimes they are premiums, sometimes they're not. Some of them probably won't be, and a few of them do have a chance. And I would say that of all of the prototypes that have not come back yet, this one probably, on paper at least, has the best chance. And before some of you go down to the comments and mention how I'm driving it on Spa in the rain, I can assure you that is purely coincidence. Because of course. Now, as far as this Audi goes, the reason why I find it curious that it's not in Gran Turismo Sport is because, quite simply, its nearest natural rival, which it always appeared beside before, even in real life, the Peugeot 908, is in the game. They are very similar cars. They both have twin-turbo diesel 5.5 litre V12s, huge power, massive torque, incredible straight-line performance, and they both have handling which isn't necessarily to everyone's taste, partially because of that massive torque. And so then the question arises, why is the Peugeot in the game when this one isn't? Well, to some degree you could argue that having the Audi R18 in the game makes this somewhat redundant, given that that was a more popular car in GT6 anyway, but I would argue that the R10 actually has a lot to offer. And in particular, I find it very reminiscent actually of a car which was recently brought back in GT Sport, and that is the Mitsubishi GTO. A fan favourite, of course, finally gets the premium treatment, but that car, as I mentioned in that review, is very much so a specialised weapon. In that review, I likened it to a rocket launcher, and you don't use a rocket launcher for close quarters combat. It's overkill, and it will actually work against you. Likewise with this car, it's got so much power, and even more torque, that using it on a really tight technical circuit, and to be honest, even Spa, is borderline. But definitely somewhere like Laguna Seca or Ascari, definitely something like Monaco, forget it. You're totally wasting the car's raw ability. Because although, of course, the majority, if not all, endurance prototypes are developed with more than just Le Mans in mind, we all know that that's the ultimate goal. And that is the exact kind of track that demands this car, because it's so good when you have the opportunity to use its best points, just like that Mitsubishi. If, for instance, you were to try and take on, say, the Pescarolo Hybrid or the Audi R18 with this car, or even the Peugeot 908 for that matter, on the vast majority of circuits, you're not going to win, because the R10 is not the most nimble thing around. It feels bigger and heavier than it actually is, and it certainly feels bigger and heavier than pretty much every other prototype, and in some cases it's because it is heavier. It weighs 925 kilos. However, on a track like Le Mans, potentially the Nordschleife, maybe a couple of others, Monza for instance, potentially Spa or Silverstone, tracks where the straight sections actually mean something, that is the kind of circumstance where you want to be using the R10, because you can actually get every bit of advantage out of that raw power. I mean, just watch this replay, look at the speedo on this car. Even with full downforce on hard tyres in the rain, it still gets to speeds of up around 220 easily. On straights where most cars would struggle to pass 200, it has phenomenal acceleration, and to boot, because of Gran Turismo 6's physics, as flawed as they are, it can do around 300 miles per hour, with the lowest downforce and the highest power. That is a massive advantage to have, and although there are others which do come close, such as, for instance, the Minolta, the 908, even the Pescarolo Hybrid, this one just edges them out, and as far as acceleration goes, this thing is nearly untouchable, especially when you factor in that it does not have NOS, and stuff like the Veyron, the GTR Nismo, the Pagani Huayra, basically the best street cars in the game for pure straight-line performance. You have to use NOS in those cars 9 times out of 10 to beat this thing, and this just does it with raw performance. It's phenomenal in a straight line. It is a relentless force when it comes to especially mid-range acceleration, and even top end, it really does belie the usual capabilities of a diesel. The vast majority of high-performance diesels, even something like my car, the Touareg V10, it's great off the line. and up to about 70 or 80 miles an hour, it's very quick. In fact, it can beat a lot of other cars, some with more power, some with less. But even then, the top end is not great, because A, it's not designed for that, and B, diesel engines just don't really aim for that kind of top end power. With this car, of course exaggerated tenfold by the game's unrealistic top speed physics, it still has fantastic top end pull in, of course, a very similar way to the Peugeot, the 908, which also has a V12 diesel. They just have incredible straight line performance. The disadvantage for the R10 is that unlike the Peugeot 908, you can feel every bit of its weight through corners, and the Peugeot simply does not feel like that. The Peugeot is light on its feet, and although with all of that monstrous torque you can definitely spin up the wheels very easily, with this one, it feels like it's so much more accentuated. It's like constantly fighting against the car, no matter what tyres you've got on it. If you're in the rain or on a sunny day, full downforce or none, it makes no difference. You will constantly be wheel spinning out of corners, and of course, with 1250 horsepower, you could argue any car's going to, but at the same time, there are a ton of other prototypes which don't have that kind of wheel spin, and it's not the same kind of wheel spin either. And if you've driven petrol prototypes and then driven diesels, this one, the Peugeot, even the R18 to some degree, I think you'll know what I mean. You can kind of feel the difference. With a petrol, they tend to wheel spin if you're revving them very high. So in other words, over-revving them on the exit of a corner, and there's a simple solution to that, just back off the throttle. The problem with a diesel is they don't rev high anyway, so all of that wheel spin is coming from torque rather than revs, and you can't really do anything about that because if you lower the throttle, you're also lowering the revs, and that's where all the torque is. So you can't really work around it that well. You can back off the throttle completely, but of course then you're sacrificing exit speed, which means that, as I said, with these big diesels, especially tuned, once you're up around 700 pp points or higher, then just by definition it's going to be a constant problem. Which is why, as I said, you need those big, wide, open tracks to really allow the car to spool up, release all of that power and torque down, for instance, the Leonard or the Mulsanne straight. That is where this car comes into its element. Or, of course, tracks like Test Course Speedway or Special Stage Route X, of course, that is ideal, but when you have to do proper circuit racing, really be selective. In GT Sport, with the more realistic speed physics, the fact that none of the prototypes really get above 940 horsepower anymore, I think this would be prime, because although the car wouldn't have the power advantage anymore, I think the difference in handling physics, suspension, tyre physics, deformation, all that kind of stuff, I think it would give the car more of an even playing field. It would allow the car to show more of its handling side of its, profile and character, rather than just being essentially the prototype equivalent of a dragster, which is pretty much what it feels like in GT6. So I would love to see it back, but I think that most people probably wouldn't care too much, especially when the R18 is so much more beginner friendly. But overall, that's it for my thoughts on the R10. Of course, I'd love to hear yours down below, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.